Hey there and welcome. I am so glad you are with me today for this webinar, this mini class on comparing the most popular styles of iridology that we have in North America right now. When we look at this and we look at it as popular versus holistic, that's kind of an interesting contrast, isn't it? And I say that because usually if we are using iridology, we think we are holistic, right? We think we are doing things that consider the person's entire being, and we're really working on physical, spiritual, emotional, all the different levels. But I'm going to tell you that that's not necessarily the case. And I know that because of my 40 plus years in the industry as an iridologist. I was originally trained as a Jensenian iridologist and then switched over to constitutional because I found that had not been taught holistically. So let's look at that in more detail as we look at some iris maps. Now, these are some of the more common iris maps that are available out there. So we've got this old standby Bernard Jensen. How many of you seen the blue and white Bernard Jensen map? Do you even own that? Raise your hand or let me know in the chat box if you have seen or own a blue and white Bernard Jensen iris map. You should be able to chat with me in here. Tabitha's seen it. Right on. Excellent. Thanks, Tabitha. What you're going to find is the more you play with me in the chat box, the more information you're going to get out of me. If everybody seems like they're asleep, I'm going to cut things short and just keep this real surface. So if you want to get the juicy stuff, go ahead and find that chat box and play with me in there. Well, when I first started in learning iridology in 1979, this was the only iris map that was available. And as we look at this iris map, and it's been updated by Ellen Jensen, she's made it more colorful. She's added some extra information. We've got this beautiful chart by Harry Wolf. It is even more subdivided than the Jensen chart. And then we've got this chart, is that by Mickey Jones? And again, very, very subdivided. So when we look at a subdivided chart, how many of us might be tempted to almost become diagnostic and allopathic, breaking the body down into individual bits? Now, don't get me wrong. I think the world of Harry Wolf. He's just an amazing person, very opinionated, and I love that. When we look at his chart, though, he's even got an area in here for renal pelvis. So that one very, very specialized part of the kidney. But I don't have a herb that works on the renal pelvis. I don't know a diet that works only on the renal pelvis. I know things that work with the whole kidney. And it seems if we're lasering down to something like renal pelvis, we are becoming more diagnostic, more allopathic. When we look at the Jensen charts and even the Mickey Jones chart, it's all the same. Things are so subdivided that we are tempted to break the body down into those tiny areas to diagnose and to prescribe based on those tiny areas, which is not a very holistic way of looking at things. Now, again, I think the world of these people, they do a tremendous amount of work. They're just not working very holistically. So what I see again with this is that when people use these charts, and truly this Ellen Jensen chart is probably the most popular chart on the market right now. What I see happening is these areas that are in here are so tiny. If you're familiar with iris structure, you'll know that we look at fiber structure in the iris, and some of these areas are literally 2 or 3 fibers wide. So what that means is two things. Number one, if you aren't absolutely perfectly oriented for your horizontal and your vertical lines, however you're assessing anything in one of these tiny areas could be completely wrong. You might be using the completely wrong area of the map if you're off by just 1 or 2 degrees, right? So that's an important thing to remember. The other thing is that even though we are all human, my children have sometimes questioned that, but even though we are all human, fact of the matter is our organs are in similar places, but not in exactly the same places, which means these maps can only be suggestions of where things are. Again, when we break the body down into such tiny, tiny areas, it becomes so tempting for us to then subdivide the body into those little areas, and for us to then begin trying to diagnose and prescribe for those individual tiny areas. Now, it's not really holistic at all. You've seen people on social media offering free iris analysis, right? How many of you have seen that? If you've seen that, put free in the comments box, and whether it's Facebook or Instagram, where they say, post your pictures, I'll give you some information, I'll comment on them. Give me the word free if you've seen people doing that. I'm going to wait for some people to type their answers in here. Yeah, Tabitha's seen that. Yeah. What about the rest of you? Have you seen those offers to do a free analysis? Now, the reason I bring this up is because when we see this, we've got a couple of issues that happen here. If an area is only 2 or 3 fibers wide, and you're doing an analysis and you don't know the conditions those photos were taken, and maybe that photo is only, maybe they've cropped it so tight it's only the iris, how do you know if it's level, right? So that's one thing. And again, if you don't know the conditions the photos were taken under, the colors will not be accurate, and therefore your assessment will be inaccurate as well. If you know anything about photography, you know that it is notoriously inaccurate for color, and even how your computer monitors display it, they'll alter color. So we've got a lot of challenges with these things, but we want to be very careful here because, you know, as if we're off by a little bit, the area that should be nose could be interpreted instead as tongue or upper jaw, or, you know, you're going to be off and your information's not going to be correct. So based on the work of Bill Caradonna, I have adapted his map with his permission, and we have made it truly constitutional. Now, here's why. In the early 1990s is when I started learning constitutional iridology, after having become very disenchanted with Jensenian iridology. With Jensenian, we were taught to diagnose. We were taught to name diseases. We were taught to name cures. And I was finding it wasn't working very well. So when I went constitutional and saw Bill Caradonna's chart, which is very much like this one, we have big areas, right? We have a lung area. It's not upper, lower, and middle lobe. We've got liver area. We've got ovary, testy. We've added penis to this area as well. Or sorry, we've added penis to this area for uterus, vagina. We've got the kidney, but we haven't broken it down into areas of the kidney because we have herbs that work on the whole kidney, right? So now, instead of diagnosing a disease, we assess the person's inherent potentials, which is totally different. And that is very, very much more holistic. When we have iris maps like this one, we are much more inclined to focus on the interrelationship of organs and organ systems, rather than trying to figure out what's going wrong with just one organ. And when we consider the interrelationship of organs and organ systems, we are becoming more holistic, because we may see a marking in one area, but the person may not have a symptom there. The symptom might be showing up in a different area of the body for which there is no marking. And we have to understand how those interrelate. Does that make sense? That the symptom is often the messenger. It's not usually the origin. If that makes sense, give me a makes sense in the comments box. Absolutely makes sense. Thank you, Tabitha. I appreciate you playing with me in the chat box here. And Nader is saying makes sense. Absolutely. So just because we see a marking in the iris, it doesn't mean that is, it doesn't mean that we're going to work with it exactly as it appears. We have to understand how the organs work together and how they influence one another in order to understand how to work with them. So this is a much more holistic approach, rather than being distracted by minute details that offer very little value in an iris assessment. We look at the whole picture and the interactive picture. This is why it's so important for iridologists to have a solid foundation in anatomy and physiology, because without that understanding of how body parts work together, we cannot do accurate iridology and iris assessment. Let's look at some eyes and see what we see here. As a Jensenian iridologist, the iris analysis for this eye would have gone something like this. You have congested lymphatics, and you need to do a lymphatic flush, and then these markings for the lymphatic system will go away. You have skin problems. You have to dry skin brush, and then this dark border is going to disappear. You have lung and breast and thyroid and brain and liver problems. We've got like things sitting in 20 minutes. We've got things at 38 to 40 minutes. That's going to be your lung. We've got all these problems showing up in your eyes because of where we're seeing darker areas or brighter lines or lines that are going across something. You have problems in those areas. And if we do all the right things, that's all going to change. Your eyes are going to change. Your intestinal tract is far too tight. We need to relax that, and that will push this ring out to where it belongs. Okay, now I'm going to tell you that for all the people in that first about 10 years of my practice, that I gave them that kind of information, and that we did hardcore work, diet and cleansing and supplements, and you name it, we did it. We never saw any of those changes happen. That was very disappointing for me and for my clients. In constitutional iridology, we first look at the overall color, which teaches us about the general overarching inherent tendencies. So we would say that this person whose eyes we're looking at on the screen right now has a tendency to be over acid throughout his body. Now, whether he's over acid or not is going to be determined by his current diet, his current lifestyle, how he processes information mentally. There's going to be a lot of things that affect whether he actually is over acid right now or not. And we're going to use his symptoms to determine if he is over acid. We would say he has a predisposition towards lymphatic congestion. However, we need to understand what his lifestyle is like to know if he has lymphatic congestion, right? We can't say for sure that he has all of these problems without having a conversation with him, without understanding his diet, his lifestyle, his relationships, all kinds of things. Now, he may have already figured out that dairy products make him congested in his mucous membranes. He may have figured out that if he stays physically active, he doesn't get sick as often. Oh, golly, could that be because being physically active keeps the lymphatic system pumping and flushing? Likely, right? So these markings we see in his eyes are inherent predispositions. They are genetic predispositions. Tabitha's saying, yes, that is great. Fantastic, Tabitha. I'm glad this is making so much sense for you. When we see these things, these are genetic predispositions. They help us to understand the questions we need to ask. So, the first question I ask any client is, what would you like my help with? That gives me a frame that I can use when I'm looking at his eyes to understand what his eyes are telling me. I also ask him to walk me through a normal day of food and a normal day of physical activity. I also want to know about his sleep. I want to know a lot of basic foundational lifestyle things before I even look in his eyes, because those foundational things are going to help me understand his eyes better, which help me understand him and his health better. If this fellow had symptoms, lymphatic swelling, circulatory issues, reduced immune response, we can justify that with what we see in his eyes. We understand why he's having those problems. And then we can go back to his diet and assess his diet. Where does it need to have changes made? His lifestyle, same thing. Supplements, what supplements would be appropriate considering what we see in his eyes, what his symptoms are, and what he's going to do with his diet. And with all of that, we can get him back on track. And we would see his symptoms improve. We won't see his eyes change, but we will see his symptoms improve. Every case I've seen of reported iris changes, have you seen those before and after photos on social media? Every one of them, when you look at them and when you understand what you're looking at in a photo, you will see that they've changed the lighting source, changed the lighting, which changes the lighting color, changes the intensity. They've changed the intensity of the lighting. They've changed the camera. They're using a different camera or the same camera, but on different settings. And every one of those things affects the output image. You can take a photo and change one setting on a camera and make it look entirely different, and thus end up with a before and after that are really doctored photos. And I am going to tell you that in order to make a valid comparison, any scientist will tell you, you have to control all the variables. Does that make sense? So if you want before and after, you have to use the same camera on the same settings with the exact same lighting, with the same room lighting, in order to be able to see if it's the same, if you've got a before and after comparison at all. So let's look at some more things that we are going to talk about. In Jensenian iridology, did that make sense about the before and after photos? I think that is such an important thing. If it does, give me before in the comments box. But you have to use the same technology in order to get the right comparison. Excellent. Yeah, thank you very much. And that's something that most iridologists don't know, or they don't acknowledge. In Jensenian iridology, we would have said that this person was extremely toxic and needed a lot of cleansing, and that this eye, because it's not all evenly brown, we've got some lighter colors in here, some lighter golds, this eye would eventually become blue with cleansing. And I would have said that this person, as a Jensenian, this person is under a lot of stress, probably headed towards a nervous breakdown, has parasites, and has skin issues. Have you seen those kinds of things stated in an iris assessment? Now, the eyes can only tell us about things that are genetic. The irides, the sclera tells us other things, but the irides only tell us things that are genetic. Parasites are not genetic. If I have parasites and I conceive a child, that child does not necessarily have parasites now in their structure, depending on where my parasites are, right? Those parasites are not going to get into my baby, right? And so unless they're maybe bloodborne, but I don't know if the placenta would filter that out, right? So we just need to be aware that what we're seeing in the iris is inherent, going back 3 to 4 generations. This is showing what's been passed down. So when I took people like this and I put them on cleanses and fasts and supplements, and they worked hard and I worked hard, and we never ever did see eyes like this lighten up or become blue. What we now know from constitutional is this, that pigment, that's all of this brown color, all of this gold, this is all pigment. Even this little dot right here and this little dot right here, those are pigments. Pigment builds over time, it does not disperse over time. When pigment builds, it's not because the person is acquiring toxicity. It's because genetically there is a cue in the body, there is coding in the body that says we are adding pigment to the eye at this point in time. And that pigment does give us information. Now, this is much like my hair hasn't always been gray, right? There's a genetic cue that says within this range of years, your hair is going to start turning gray. Same thing happens with the eyes. Sometimes we will see with elderly people that their eyes become more watery. The iris color fades a little bit, but that again is a genetic cueing. It's not because of something the person has done. So because we know pigment is inherent, we know it accumulates over time. And I've got case studies of people where photos 20 years apart, different cameras, totally up front. It's very obvious that the eyes are the same because we can see structural things in the before and after. And what we see is in the before, there is less isolated pigment, or freckling, as some people call it. And in the after, we see more freckling or pigment, right? And we know that that pigment has acquired over the years, and it gives us information about how this person's body is genetically programmed to be behaving at certain points in time. And that's valuable information. In constitutional iridology, this iris has inherent predispositions towards liver insufficiencies and a little bit of a predisposition towards being over acid. So we would ask this person specifically liver-oriented questions, but we would need to ask them in a way that the client would understand, because most of your clients, if you say, do you have a liver problem? They haven't got a clue. So we would need to be very specific in how we ask those questions. So we need to understand, what are the jobs the liver does, so we can ask those kinds of questions. For example, the liver stores iron. Do you have a history of anemia? The liver is responsible in a large part for immune. How is your immune system? How often do you get sick? The liver is responsible for how we process our carbohydrates and whether they're going into fat or cholesterol or getting used for, or triglycerides. And so we would want to ask, how's your cholesterol? How's your triglycerides? Have you been gaining weight lately? What's your blood sugar balance like? Is your energy stable through the day, which would suggest that the blood sugars are quite even? Or is it a roller coaster ride, which suggests the liver and the pancreas may not be working together very well to stabilize that carbohydrate burn into energy? So when we see this, that we know we want to ask those liver-oriented questions, and we want to find out about their diet to see what they're doing that could be helping or hindering the liver. And then we want to coach them in ways that will help them to support their liver through their daily practices. These eyes are not going to turn blue, regardless of what we do. We do not have a diet or a cleanse that will do that. That would imply that we are changing this person's genetic structure through diet, which with epigenetics, we can turn genes on and off, but I don't think it's yet possible to totally change genetic structure. A lot of people consider dark brown eyes to be the most difficult to read or to assess. I don't like the term read. That makes it sound like we're, doing things that are just off the wall. And I hope this doesn't, if this offends you, I'm sorry, but saying we read the eyes is like saying you read tarot cards or you read palms, right? And that relegates iridology into the non-science. And iridology is a science. So we assess, we do not read. So understanding irid gives us such a foundation for what we want to do and for understanding our clients' inherent predispositions. When we see an eye like this, again, we know this person's genetics suggest an increased risk of liver insufficiencies, also some blood insufficiencies. And so then we have to ask questions, but this person, this is a woman, also likely has an inability to methylate her B vitamins. Now, when I say that, it's because when we see, and I've got the wrong lights on in my room to see this clearly, and my computer screen isn't bright enough. I wanted you to be able to not have shadows on my face here. In a dark brown eye, we often see areas that are slightly darker, and I'm sorry, I'm not picking up on any because of the lighting in my room, right? Like maybe this one right here. When we see these little tiny patches of the darker brown, that suggests this person may actually not be able to methylate her B vitamins very well, right? And that tells us more of what we need to know, because this is a woman, she and her husband came in to see me. They've been trying to conceive for 3 years. As I looked at her eyes and I noticed that she had those tiny, tiny dark brown pigments in various places in her eyes that she would probably not methylate. So I had to ask her, of course, how far apart are your cycles? Well, 90 days. Okay, that's a red flag. I saw this, and then I asked her, because methylation often links into polycystic ovarian syndrome. I asked her, has the doctor ever said anything like, you might have PCOS? Have they ever used the PCOS term with you? Oh yeah, they said that. So I didn't say she had it. I asked her if her doctor had said that. So yes, she had that. Well, PCOS and infertility are like this, right? And PCOS and methylation issues are, again, like this. They are best friends. Then when we notice that she also has this white edge, this lighter edge to her eye, we know that her liver is not managing her carbohydrates well. And in truth, her triglycerides were slightly elevated and she was type 2 diabetic, right? And so looking at her eyes gave me all the questions I needed to ask her to be able to ascertain what the doctor had done through lab tests. But of course, I can't diagnose and prescribe. So I asked the questions carefully to find out what my client has been told already. And that confirms what I've seen. When I understand these things, I then know what we need to do, how we need to clean up her diet, what kind of supplements we need to use with her. She and her husband did conceive. They told her she would we actually reversed the type 2 diabetes while we were working so that her blood sugars were fine. We got her menstrual cycles down to 30 days. Go us. It took about 1.5 years of work to get her in the right place, and then she conceived. She was told that because she had a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes and PCOS, she would absolutely go into gestational diabetes, which she never did. We kept her blood sugars so stable, so absolutely stable through the entire pregnancy using foods and supplements and lifestyle. She did such a good job, and her husband was with her 110%. They worked together on this. It was so exciting to see how they worked together. She actually, tiny Asian woman, not overweight at all. We would expect overweight with PCOS and T2D, but she was not overweight at all. And she delivered that baby in a 3-hour labor delivery from start to finish. Pretty impressive. Tabitha says, using what the doctors have already told her to confirm what you were seeing. Yeah, absolutely. We were just dovetailing the information to make sure that we were on the right track. Now, if she had not had those diagnoses from the doctor, I would have suggested that she go back to her doctor and get some additional lab work done. Now, I can't requisition lab work, but I can ask my clients to go back to their doctors to get it. And so I would have, they won't even test for MTHFR here anymore because it affects so many people. And in the Asian population, it's about a 75% prevalence, right? But I would have asked them to do a lipid panel, which includes the female hormones. I would have wanted a blood sugar study, probably a fasting one. There's a few things that I would have asked her to get that would have maybe helped to push her doctor to come up to the same conclusions that I came up with, right? And so I always want to see labs whenever I can, just to see how it's confirming. And sometimes they give me extra information that help guide me a little bit, right? I'm totally open to being to input that helps me do a better job. So a Jensenian iridologist would have said this woman definitely has current liver issues and would have likely given just a liver supplement, but that's not going to deal with the methylation issue. Even though methylation is a liver thing, because it is a genetic anomaly, the herbs don't make the liver methylate. We actually need to give these people that have the methylation issues, we need to give them the methylated Bs, right? Because the liver's not going to do it no matter how much we love that liver. And so if we had not given her the methylated Bs, the chances are she would still not be pregnant because she needed those methylated Bs to help the liver work properly, to help her then balance her blood sugars and her blood fats, so she could make her cholesterol, so she could balance her hormones, so she could get pregnant. Do you see how everything followed in sequence, that we had to do things in the right order here? Again, she has this little white band at the top, which suggests cholesterol to a Jensenian. She's got radial furrows, which says she has parasites, again, to a Jensenian. And none of that was, well, she did have some issues that this reflected, but we weren't concerned with parasites, and she did not have parasites. So constitutional iridology is a holistic assessment tool. It allows us to connect the dots within one person rather than looking at one thing at a time. And it requires a conversation with the client. And that in and of itself makes it more holistic. How many times have you heard of people going to a medical doctor and they say, I've got a sore throat or whatever. And before the doctor's even looked in their throat, he's written a prescription for an antibiotic. He doesn't even want a conversation. He's jumping to the conclusion of this is the answer. And, you know, he doesn't know if this person has a sore throat because they were at a rock concert last night and they were screaming their lungs out, right? He hasn't bothered to ask. He's just assuming a sore throat always means an infection. Maybe the person just needs vocal rest for 48 hours to recover, right? And that's a huge difference between what we do as holistic practitioners and what more allopathic practitioners do. When we look at an iris, we also notice these little flecks of color. And these are rusty orange. Now, a North American or Jensenian iridologist would say these show toxicity. And the fact that people often accumulate these over time, say the person is getting more toxic. They would say, particularly in this case, this person needs to do a cleanse. And if you cleanse, these pigments are going to go away. In constitutional iridology, we say these are inherent. And the tendency or the predisposition to have these in your eyes is genetic, which means they may surface over time. We know then that these give us at least two pieces of information. The first is the color of the pigment tells us which organ wants to be out of balance, which organ wants to be the troublemaker. The placement of the pigment tells us which organ is going to suffer for it, right? Again, looking at what is the root and who is the messenger. And when we understand that, we always want to work really focused on the root to help it behave itself better. But we may also need to band-aid the messenger to help our client be more comfortable for the time being. Again, the pigments are not going to change in the eye. When we know we've arrived, when we know we've got it right, is when the client says, I don't have the symptoms anymore. Now, sometimes with what we're seeing in the eye, the client will need to be doing self-care for the rest of their life, just because that's what the genetics dictate. Does that make sense? We can't always fix everything. Sometimes we only are controlling things. A North American iridologist would again say this person is very toxic, would require a lot of cleansing. This person is under a lot of stress right now, probably headed for a nervous breakdown. Oh my goodness, you know, you're in such bad shape. This white outer margin to a Jensenian says you absolutely have cholesterol blockages happening, probably from a sodium imbalance in your body. So that's why they call it a sodium cholesterol ring. In constitutional, we would say the liver has some inherent insufficiencies. What is your body doing? What are we seeing? What are your lab tests showing? We would suspect that we might see elevated cholesterol or triglycerides from this, particularly because we've got so many liver indicators in this eye. And that being the case, we are going to then work with diet and with liver, right? To bring them back into balance. These rings do not mean the person is a nervous breakdown. Instead, they function in the sympathetic nervous system. This person internalizes stress. They like to be busy all the time. These are the people that are too busy. They've got to-do lists that they can never get through because there's too many things on them. And so for these people, we need to feed the nervous system. We need to teach them that self-care and slowing down periodically are critical parts of staying well, right? And so they're not headed for a nervous breakdown, but they certainly deplete their bodies quickly if they don't do good self-care. Again, the white margin at the edge of the eyes suggests issues with liver metabolizing carbohydrates. We need to then have those lab tests back to understand, are we seeing issues there? Because this can also be natural aging of the cornea. So we don't want to be jumping to conclusions without having some good data behind it. Only when we have that conversation with our client can we actually make sense of the eyes. Without that conversation, we can identify markings, but that's all we're doing. We can't identify cause, we can't identify interaction, we can't identify result. We need to have a conversation with the client. A North American iridologist, again, would say this person has a ton of parasites. Parasites don't change our genetic structure, so why would they show up in the iris? We can't pass parasites on through our DNA, so they're not going to show up in our iris. So, unless you've got an actual parasite that lives in the eyeball, and there are some, you're not going to see clearly in the iris any indication of parasite. Constitutional iridology would again say this person lives in their sympathetic response. They tend to be always ready for that next crisis. And because of that, we need to sustain their nervous system. We need to make sure they're nourishing it well. We need to make sure that they are learning how to have slow down times in the day where they can recharge. We need to be choosing the recommendations we make based on the person. Maybe this person has already figured out that if they go for 16 hours a day, they don't sleep well at night. And maybe they figured out that the best thing they can do is after supper, go for a gentle walk to clear their head, to let go of the day. And then they go home and maybe read something relaxing for an hour. And now they're ready to go to bed. And now they can sleep because they've started taking care of their nervous system. Does that make sense? So the answer isn't always a pill or a supplement. The presence of multiple lacunae down here at about the 33 to 35 minutes suggests ovary issues for this woman. So if we're having fertility challenges or menopausal issues or hormonal issues to do with reproduction, this might have an impact. If we're not seeing those issues, then we're not going to even focus on these. We have a marking over here at 15 minutes, and we can see that this actually breaks through the collarette. It spans from the stomach through the intestines, through the heart, the bronchioles, the thyroid, parathyroid. So that is, again, an area when you understand anatomy and physiology, you would understand what things to listen for that your client is telling you. And if they are telling you things that could correlate to this, that could connect to this, you understand why they've got those concerns or those symptoms, and now you can start working with it and you can ask the right questions. When we're looking at an eye like this, there are so many markings that we could dissect, but we don't need to because they're not all important to our client right now. As an iridologist, you would understand which ones are important to your client right now based on what they've asked for help with. And you would also understand how the other markings could have an impact at some point in time. And so you always want to keep focused in the current appointment on what the client's problems are and the markings you see that correlate to that. And you want to tuck the other markings into the back of your brain so you can be aware of when is the right time to be working with those. If there is ever a right time, maybe the client is doing enough right that those other markings become non-issues. They just stay there as warnings that the client needs to behave themselves. Does this make sense? That we are not going to focus on every single marking in here? If that makes sense, give me a makes sense in the comments box. Yeah, Tabitha's saying makes sense. Thank you so much, Tabitha. The next layer of information we need to consider here is, oh, I'm so glad this is all making sense to everybody. Thank you for letting me know that. Fantastic. The next layer we need to consider is the way the fiber is sitting in the eye. The way the fiber is sitting in the eye tells us a lot about how this person is put together. It again adds to our understanding of inherent predispositions. Now, in North American iridology, each and every one of these things would be called a lesion. Now, I don't know about you. Lesion makes me think of cancer. I think of a cancerous lesion. And, you know, if someone tells me I've got a lesion, I'm going to have a little bit of a panic right then and there, right? We never want to do that to our clients. In constitutional, these are called lacunae. A lacuna simply is an unfilled gap. No emotion attached to that. In Jensenian, looking at this, this person has lesions in their brain. How scary is that? I have worked with clients that have had brain cancer. This person has lesions in the lungs and bronchioles, in the kidneys and adrenals, the perineum, the rectum. I mean, they've got lesions all over the place. Which, does that mean they're headed towards cancer? You know, the darker the shading, the worse the problem. And some of these have got some pretty dark shading. Are we headed down a really bad path here? In constitutional iridology, we take a step back. We look at the whole eye. What this tells me is this person is more prone to endocrine imbalances. And so I'm going to be listening for things that my client is saying that would tie into adrenal, pituitary. Those would be the key ones for endocrine. Heart is an endocrine. We now understand it's a secondary endocrine. So heart, we're listening for the client saying they want help with things like in those areas, or that their symptoms, although they don't realize it, tie into those areas. Now remember, these markings are passed down for 3 to 4 generations. So our client may not have problems in these areas, may just be prone to problems in those areas. And that's very valuable for us. We can ask, and should ask, is there a personal or family history of, let's come down here, any kidney or adrenal things? Now, most people don't know what their adrenals do, but they might know what kidneys do. So personal or family history of any kidney issues. Oh yeah, my dad had, my grandpa had, right? And we get the family history that way. And by asking, is there a personal or family history, we take the trauma and the angst out of the question. If we simply say, we're looking at the eyes, oh, do you have a kidney problem? They're going to go, no, should I? Well, no, I didn't mean it that way. Really, I didn't. Right. So by asking, is there a personal or family history? Or is there anything running in the family? And they give us this shopping list of things that run in the family, and we superimpose that over the eye, and we see the markings in this person's eye that actually correlate to some of those things that are in the family. We now have a deeper understanding, right? And an understanding that can help us to work with our client without scaring the daylights out of them. So again, this person may already have figured out, you know, my 3 generations of my predecessors had kidney issues. I already know that if I don't hydrate well, and if I eat too much oxalate high foods, I'm going to end up with kidney stones because I've already had a kidney stone. So I hydrate well, I limit my oxalates, and that seems to keep my kidneys happy. Yes, they figured it out. I don't need to dwell on it, right? And that actually gives me the opportunity then to say, you know, this suggests that, yeah, that history in the family and your symptoms, yeah, we see why you have that predisposition, and congratulations for doing great things for your own self-care. So good that you're informed and taking action, giving them a pat on the back rather than constantly pointing out negatives they're doing. How would that feel if you were in a healthcare appointment for yourself and the professional you were working with said, "Whoa, you are so on track. Good job. Let's build on that foundation." Would that be empowering or what? If that would feel good, give me a feels good in the comments box. Because that is exactly what we need to be doing with our clients. This is about empowering them. It's not about scaring them half to death. In North American iridology, everyone's saying feels good. Yeah, right? So important. You know, so often when my clients leave my office, they will say to me, "You're my favorite person to work with," because when I leave here, I have a game plan. I feel empowered. I know I'm on the right track. I had a teenager say that to me, she has a lot of healthcare going on right now. And she said, "I love coming to see you because you make me feel like I can beat this thing. You make me feel like I have some control." And she doesn't have a major serious problem. She's got a lot of little problems. And all of her other professionals just make her feel like she's a loser. She said, "When I come here, you help me feel like I can do this." And it's like, yes, because if you feel like you can, then you can. And I'm in your corner. Let's do this together, right? In North American iridology, every single fiber, every marker, every little thing, whether it's a fiber that bends, whether it's a pigment, whether it's a little tuft, whether it's bending off like this, every one of these is a current problem that needs to be addressed right now. A little overwhelming? Yeah, a little. I used to practice iridology like that. Man alive, I can't believe my business survived me when I did that. Really. With holistic, we need to take that step back. We start with looking at the whole eye, looking at listening to what our client is saying, really listening to help us understand what we're seeing in the eye, and working from there then to understand their predispositions so we can give them a cohesive start. And we don't address everything in one sitting, ever, ever. That is overwhelming for everybody. What we want to do instead is we want to choose, again, what markers correlate to the symptom that is most important for them to resolve. And with your training, you understand how all their symptoms are probably linked together. People come in with lists of 10 symptoms they want help with. And I can almost instantly break it down. Well, those 8 are all one problem, just different manifestations. And these 2 are another problem. So we're going to take care of the 8 first, because that's really simple. We're going to take care of the foundation of that. And as we take care of the foundation that is holding all of these 8 symptoms up, those symptoms are going to collapse, right? And so we want to choose to work in a way where our client is going to get the fastest results, the easiest way. Because if they start seeing results quickly, that's going to give them the energy and the fuel to keep going. And as we need to make the program maybe a little harder to work on some other things, or there's some other things that we see we should work on that they weren't even aware of, they're more likely to want to stick with it and get the job done. We need to remember that depending on that, every marker we see in an eye impacts other markers. Everything will modify something else, right? This is, I call it a dream catcher, where one thing in the eye connects to another, connects back up to here, connects over to here. So that's really all one theme, all connected. And when we understand that pathway, it becomes really easy to create simple programs, simple, unique programs, not cookie cutter programs, not programs that have 27 different supplements in them, because who can do that mentally and emotionally, right? Instead, we're able to create simple, succinct programs 3, maybe 4 or 5 supplements, a couple of key dietary changes. Typically on a first appointment, my client will get 2 to 3 very specific dietary pieces, like increase your water intake from 3 cups a day to 6, reduce your coffee from 8 cups a day to 4, include 2 cups of leafy greens, right? Very specific. And they might leave with 2 supplements, like maybe a digestive enzyme, if that's appropriate. And, if they're in for sinus issues, maybe something to deal with the sinuses, right? So we're being very specific and very deliberate in the changes we make so that our client can be successful. And we're basing all of that on what we see in the eye and where our client is starting from. So we're never trying to give them a program that's going to last them for the rest of their life and fix everything. We build things step by step. As they get the dietary things in place, and that's their new lifestyle, now we can add a couple more dietary changes. And we just shift the diet and craft the diet. We guide the supplements on an as-needed basis. As the chemistry changes because the nutritional status has changed, the supplements need to be altered as well. Make sense? Does this sound like it's an approachable way to work with clients? Yeah. It's not about scaring clients off at all. North American would say this person has a weak constitution, and would say this, it makes it sound like this person is going to break if you look at them cross-eyed, right? We call this a connective tissue type. And what that means is that we need to support the digestion in this person so that they can support their structure, right? Typically with connective tissue people, the structure lacks resiliency, but we can enhance that by making sure they're getting the right foods and they're breaking those foods down thoroughly. We can maximize how their body repairs itself. And again, that's taking that step back and looking at the person as a whole to decide, where do we start? What is the biggest thing we need to do here in relation to what the client has asked for help with? When we understand, again, the relationship between the various constitutional markers, we can work preventively, we can work correctively, we work to empower, we work to educate. We want our clients to see us as teachers, not demigods, right? That's when I know I've won. I have a helicopter going overhead. I apologize for those. I think we're in a training flight path. We have a lot of helicopters going over our house. Very weird. Maybe it's the police. They're finally after me. No, I'm just kidding. All right. So iridology is kind of like having a Star Trek tricorder. It helps you to see inside the body, but it doesn't give us disease names. Again, we're never, ever assigning disease names. We're looking at color, extra colors in the eye, help us to understand the interrelationship of organs. The fiber texture teaches us much. We actually don't use an iris map until the very, very end. Like, I often don't even pull out an iris map till about the 4th or 5th appointment, because we're working constitutionally until then. The eyes are the window of the soul. I love that. It is so true, Tabitha. So, you've been with me for 50 minutes now, and I didn't even introduce myself. Here we go. My name is Judith Cobb. I'm an IPA Level 3 certified iridology instructor. There are only 8 Level 3 certified instructors in the world. I was one of the first 3 when they introduced this level. I've been in the holistic healing industry, started studying in 1979, which might be older than some of you, and that's brilliant. I love to have younger people in groups. And if it's older than you, or if you're older than that, that's great. I love everybody that comes in. Over the years, I've designed and taught many different courses, and I've written many books that I've self-published. Most of them are out of print right now. And the only one that is in print is the textbook that I've written for the dynamic iridology course that I teach. I am also a certified nutrition professional affiliated with these 2 Canadian organizations and a professional member of the Alberta Herbalist Association. I'm going to be teaching at the Alberta Herb Gathering in August, which is going to be a ton of fun. The next go round of the dynamic iridology course is starting on August 24th. If you are a health professional, and that means you've completed a college level anatomy and physiology course. So you might be a massage therapist, a licensed massage therapist, a registered nurse, an LPN, an ND, an MD. I've got radiology. I had a student who's had a master's degree in radiology. If you've got the A&P under your belt, then this course, and you want to learn iridology at a professional level, this course is for you. If you're interested in using iridology with your clients or patients, then seriously, we should chat. I only accept people who've got the A&P because you need to understand the interrelationship of the organs, and we go deep. We go deep. Here's what one of my students has said. She's a certified clinical aromatherapist and a chartered herbalist. She took an iridology course from another school but felt it left her inadequately trained and she wasn't using her iridology at all. She decided to come into my course. Wonderful instructor presents material in a course that is in this course in a concise, organized way, and clearly answers every question. So important to me that we're interactive in the class, structures the classes in a way that makes them incredibly interesting. And now she feels very confident and she recommends this course. Thank you, Joyce. This is Julie. She's a registered nurse and a CNHP. And she says she left Western medicine in favor of natural health. She had taken iridology in her CNHP, but it just left her totally confused. And she's been using iridology to help herself and her family. Judith is truly amazing and is my most favorite instructor out of all my many years of higher education. Love that. This is Adam Zukowskis. He's a herbalist and a naturopath in the UK. And he had already studied iridology before he came to me. But what he says is that he loves that it was taught from up-to-date information. And he loves the mentoring that I offer both in the course and outside of the course for my students. Very cool. So the next dynamic iridology course is coming up on August 24th. It is the only live, online, fully mentored course for health professionals who want to be using iridology in a way that will help them to get their client programs created in their client sessions. Too many professionals see the client, then go off and spend a few hours of their own time creating a protocol. They're not getting paid for those hours of protocol creation. I teach my students how to do the assessment and create the protocol in their client sessions. How many of you spend your own time outside of client time creating programs? If you don't feel too vulnerable, I'd love to know that. And just put outside in the comments box. Because yeah, how would you like to not do that anymore, Tabitha? How would you like to maybe make your appointments 15 minutes longer if you need to? My appointments are a first appointment is 75 minutes and a follow-up is 60 minutes, right? How would that feel to get that time back and to be able to get it done when you're with your client? Pretty cool, huh? It'd be so good. So the goal is to teach you constitutional iridology so you can integrate it with what you already know about nutrition or herbs, and so that you can get your client programs created when you are with your client, not on your own time. So in order to, I'm not going to turn this into a commercial, a huge, big, long commercial. I'm just going to say, if you're a health professional and you've got A&P under your belt, you can get a transcript or you are licensed. I didn't change this slide. I need to fix this. Hang on just a sec. I can't fix this slide. I'm going to give you a correct link here. But if you want iridology and you've got those things under your belt, you've got your A&P, you're either a licensed professional who required A&P, or you've got A&P on a college transcript with a grade of over 80%, we need to talk. And to do that, you would go to almost that URL. You want to go to tiny URL. Oh, let me put that. You know what? tinyurl.com/dynamic-iridology. You don't need the insight part. Okay. I thought I had corrected that and apparently I didn't. So just leave off the insight, that dash insight. And you can schedule just a one-on-one Zoom call with me and we'll have a chat about your goals, your qualifications, and we'll see if the dynamic iridology course is a good fit for you. Now, sometimes it's not. And I'm really, really honest about that. When I'm with a person, I will say, yeah, you need to upgrade your A&P first, or with what you want to do, this isn't going to work very well for you. You're welcome to take the course, but it's not a great fit. And, probably maybe half the people I talk to, it's like, this is a good fit. I'm inviting you to enroll. Here's the enrollment link, right? Because this course is for health professionals and we go deep. And I offer a lot of mentoring and a lot of support in it that other teachers don't offer. And I know that because I have students who've been certified with other instructors, then come to me and pay to take my course. And by the end of the second lesson, they're saying, I've learned more in this course than I learned in the other course. I'm already feeling more confident, right? So the goal here is to teach you iridology, to help you be confident in using it so that you will use it in your practice. So if that is of interest to you, tinyurl.com/dynamic-iridology. Hop on that and let's schedule a time to talk, not a high-pressured sales call. It is really an opportunity for us to see if this is going to be a good fit for you. And if it is, then I will invite you to enroll. And if not, I'm happy to coach you in a direction that will serve you better. How does that sound? Does that sound like it's a win-win? If it does, give me win-win. Yes, win-win. Fantastic, Tabitha. Thank you for putting that in. Now, that's everything I've got prepped for you today. Any questions or comments or concerns you want to lob out at me? Let's have you pop that into the chat box quickly if you've got a question that you want to ask or a comment you'd like to make. And let's make sure we get you answered and taken care of. I appreciated the interaction with you today. And we'll give just another minute in case something is trying to come through as a message. I know they sometimes. Is there a specific camera you use? Yes, there is. And that is actually something that we talk about a lot in the course, because these cheap little $300 iriscopes, they don't cut it. In fact, I tell my students, don't spend your money there. Save your money up for a proper setup. So yeah, we do. There's a couple of setups that I really like, and we talk about them in detail in the course. I don't want my students purchasing a camera until they get to the end of their course, because cameras are expensive and you need to know that you love this before you make that investment. Yeah. So happy to deal with that. Makes sense. Thank you for the great presentation. New to iridology, been very interesting, informative. Nana, I hope I've said your name right. You're welcome. I'm glad you were here today. All righty. Anybody else have anything they want to share with me before we call it done for today? Just watching those comments. So I don't think I'm seeing anything come in. Have a fantastic rest of your day, and I'm hoping that you will take the moment to book that time to speak with me one-on-one, to learn more about the course and to see if it's a good fit for where you're at right now. And yeah, let's see if it's going to work for you. Take good care, and we will see you soon. Bye for now, and thanks for being here.